Imagine a world teetering on the edge of the familiar, a place where the fabric of the everyday begins to unravel, revealing glimpses of the extraordinary lurking beneath. You're about to embark on a journey into the enigmatic, where the peculiar and the perplexing intertwine, where every tale twists the mind and tugs at the spirit. It's a descent into the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained. This is When Reality Frays. New episodes are published every Monday and Thursday, and When Reality Frays is available everywhere fine podcasts are found. Before we move on, please hit that follow or subscribe button and turn on all reminders so you're alerted when new episodes are released. Today's episode contains one story entitled 30 Seconds. It's a cautionary tale of the perils of combining biology and technology. Now, let's get to the story. The accident was cataclysmic, a brutal collision that destroyed Daniel Harper's life. It was 5:17 a.m. and Daniel, a 34-year-old salesman, was on his way to an early breakfast meeting with a client. He was getting other work done while driving, his phone pressed to his ear as he gave instructions to his annoyed assistant, who was distinctly unhappy about the hour. While he could hear her irritation, he ignored it. Taking his eyes off the road, he leaned over to dig through his open briefcase for a contract he wanted her to summarize. Finding it, he looked back at the road in time to see the looming grill of a semi-truck. There was a fraction of an instant in which he noted its driver slumped behind the wheel. Asleep, perhaps, or maybe even a heart attack or stroke had claimed him. But the why didn't matter. The impact itself was apocalyptic. Metal screamed as it disintegrated from the force of the crash. Glass exploded in a glittering spray, and Daniel's world collapsed into a void. His body slammed against the dashboard, then he was ejected and sent tumbling like a rag doll across the asphalt. His spine snapped at the cervical vertebrae, severing his brain's connection to everything below his neck. More than a month later, Daniel awoke in a hospital, the hum of ventilators and monitors his new reality. The doctors delivered their verdict with clinical precision: quadriplegia, permanent and total. His arms, legs, and torso were no longer his, having been reduced to dead weight. His once fast-paced life was now reduced to a bed, his mind held prisoner in the husk of an atrophied body that refused to obey. The first few weeks were a crushing cascade of depression and suicidal thoughts, a preview of what he had to look forward to for the remainder of his life. Friends visited at first, their awkward silences louder than their words. But they stopped coming, and his only human contact was the nurses and their suffocating pity. They called him brave in tones that felt like condolences, not admiration. And all he wanted was to die. He just couldn't figure out how he was going to accomplish that without someone's help. Yet. Then came Neurosynth, a biotech firm shrouded in rumors. Their offer arrived like a lifeline tossed into a storm. Dr. Ethan Caldwell, their lead engineer, explained a prototype neural controller, a lattice of nanoscale circuits designed to bypass his shattered spine, linking his brain directly to his isolated body. It was experimental, untested on humans, but there was hope of restoring movement and walking out of the antiseptic prison that was his existence. The next day, his room was filled to capacity with lawyers from both the hospital and Neurosynth. Daniel couldn't sign the mound of documents and releases necessary to move forward, so the attorneys read every word aloud and made sure Daniel's spoken response was captured on video. The surgery was a 19-hour ordeal, his skull cradled in a sterile frame as surgeons, under the watchful eyes of Neurosynth engineers, wove the implant into his neural pathways, threaded microscopic filaments through the delicate architecture of his brain. When he woke, His left foot itched, a faint but exciting spark. Days later, he lifted a badly shaking arm a few inches off the bed. And nearly a month later, he stood on trembling legs with the help of 2 nurses. Soon, he was walking the hospital corridors, each step a stiff middle finger to fate. But the implant did more than restore his body. It began with brief and disorienting flickers, like fragments of a film he hadn't seen playing in his head. He had a vision of a nurse dropping a syringe, then 30 seconds later he watched it happen. A doctor spilled coffee, the event happening 30 seconds later. A sparrow crashed into the hospital window, its wings crumpling in his vision, precisely 30 seconds before there was a thud as a sparrow slammed into his window. At first, he thought the implant was misfiring, frying his brain with hallucinations. But it kept occurring, and he realized there was only one explanation. The neural controller had opened a window into the future, a 30-second preview of what was to come, vivid and unerring. He accepted it as a secret gift, already thinking of what he could do with precognitive knowledge. He spent weeks in the hospital's rehab wing, simultaneously honing this ability in silence. He learned to use the visions, to trust and move in sync with them, dodging obstacles and anticipating conversations. And he learned that if he reacted to a vision within the 30-second preview he received, he could change the outcome of an event before it ever occurred. In a moment of vulnerability, seeking a connection as he restarted his life, Daniel confided in a neurosynth engineer during a routine checkup of his implant. The engineer's face remained calm, as if he wasn't surprised, but something in his eyes was off. Daniel instantly regretted revealing his secret, a knot tightening in his gut. The next night, as he slept in his new home that had been paid for by the trucking company's insurance carrier, his door exploded inward. Masked men, their movements precise and brutal, stormed in. A needle pierced his arm, and his world was swallowed by darkness. He woke in a warehouse, its air heavy with the stench of mildew. The walls were stained, the floor littered with cigarette butts, and flickering monitors lined one wall, streaming live feeds of a huge variety of sporting events, all with betting lines constantly updating. The leader, Victor, was a wiry man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. His voice was a low growl that carried the weight of authority. He explained the rules. Daniel's visions would make them rich. They sat him before the screens, a metal chair his throne, his wrists bound by zip ties. They bet on anything with outcomes unfolding in 30-second bursts. Roulette spins, boxing matches, even the flicker of currency exchanges. His predictions were flawless, turning their thousands into millions in only days. They moved him to a sprawling estate outside the city and guarded him as if he were the most important person on the planet. He was fed the best foods and offered the finest women, but a gilded cage is still a prison, and Daniel's foresight became his rebellion. He studied the guards' patterns, using his visions to help map their habits. He saw a guard's cigarette lighter slip 30 seconds before it fell, sparking a distraction. He saw a door left ajar before a guard forgot to lock it. He saw a delivery truck's arrival before its horn blared. Each vision was a piece of a puzzle, and Daniel assembled it with meticulous care. One night, as a guard fumbled with his lighter, Daniel took off. He darted through the mansion's maze. His heart pounded as he navigated the futures flashing in his mind. He dodged a guard's patrol, slipped through an unlocked door, and leapt into the back of the delivery truck as it pulled away, its driver oblivious. When the truck reached the city, Daniel vanished into its underbelly, a ghost among the lost. But freedom was a fragile illusion. The CIA had noticed the wild success of Victor's gang. They weren't concerned with how much money he had made. They were intrigued by the apparently infallible source of information that was being used to get it. It didn't take them long to learn about Daniel, which led them to neurosynth and the engineer who Daniel had told about his ability to see the future. The CIA had been conducting neural experiments for years, but they had all been gruesome failures. Test subjects were left either catatonic or dead. But here was Daniel, a proof of concept that would revolutionize how the CIA operated. He was their unicorn. They ambushed him in a rundown motel in Nevada, its neon sign buzzing faintly. 15 separate teams in black SUVs rolled in, their arrivals carefully timed to be 2 seconds apart. This flooded Daniel's brain with more visions than he could react to, and they managed to take him without any incident. He awoke in a covert facility, a fortress buried beneath a Nevada desert mountain. The facility was a labyrinth of concrete corridors, its walls lined with cameras and patrolled by soldiers with blank faces and hooded eyes. His handlers, men in crisp suits with cold voices, called him Asset. They forced Daniel to use his visions to guide operatives through hostile cities and foresee ambushes. He foresaw a bomb detonate immediately after a diplomat's car turned a corner in Istanbul, warning the protection team who changed the route 5 seconds before they would have made the turn and been killed. He saw a sniper assassinate the Secretary of State, and the CIA was able to relay an urgent warning with less than 2 seconds to spare, saving the secretary. But there were also failures. Visions he couldn't describe adequately for the knowledge to be actionable within a 30-second window. But that was only part of his job. The CIA also used his ability to ensure carefully targeted assassinations went off without any surprises. For Daniel, each death was his fault, the burden of lives lost weighing on his soul. He grew despondent, but his handlers pushed him. To them, he was simply a tool, not a human being, and all they cared about was success. The desire to escape consumed Daniel with a fire that burned brighter each day. He studied the facility's rhythms, mentally mapping guard rotations, camera angles, and security protocols. When a vision showed a power surge 30 seconds before it plunged the facility into darkness, he was prepared. He moved, slipping through corridors and dodging patrols with precognitive precision. His body, lean and strong from months of forced training, carried him through the labyrinth, his mind a map of 30-second futures. He emerged into the desert, continued to evade the guards, and made his way to Vegas, where he begged for change outside a casino. He walked through the doors with $10.23 in his hand, and walked out 2 hours later with nearly $500,000 in cash. It would have been much more, but he was savvy and intentionally lost often enough for the casino staff to chalk it up to, it was just his lucky night. For weeks, Daniel drifted through small towns, avoiding cameras, blending into crowds, and using cash from his Vegas winnings. His visions kept him one step ahead, but the constant strain of foresight was taking a toll. Headaches, insomnia, a fraying edge to his sanity. Every 30 seconds he saw threats, opportunities, and dangers. His mind was never truly at rest. In a dusty diner in a forgotten Utah town, he met Lila. She was a waitress, her auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes carrying a quiet strength that pierced his defenses. He ordered coffee, and she lingered, her smile a balm to his battered soul. They talked, their conversation stretching into hours as the diner emptied. Lila spoke of a life marked by loss, a brother lost to addiction, a mother to cancer, but also a life of dreams she still chased, like writing a novel or seeing the Pacific Ocean. Daniel, guarded at first, found himself unraveling, sharing fragments of his life before the accident. Her laughter was a warmth he hadn't felt since the crash, her smile a tether to a humanity he had forgotten. For a moment, he was just Daniel Harper, a man, not a fugitive or a weapon. As they stepped outside, a vision struck. CIA agents, their black SUVs converging on the diner. He grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her into an alley, his heart pounding as he navigated the future's warnings. She followed, her trust fragile but real, her eyes wide with fear but unwavering. The CIA vans screeched into view, doors slamming and agents fanned out, just as he had seen. Daniel and Lila ran, hand in hand, guided by Daniel's visions. They hid in motels with peeling wallpaper, slept in forests under starless skies, and moved under cover of darkness. Lila's courage was a quiet fire, her questions sharp, but her resolve unbroken. She learned to read his signals, to freeze when he froze, to trust the futures he saw. But the CIA was relentless, flooding the region with assets. They deployed drones and satellites. But the most effective tool was a group of operatives who were trained to anticipate Daniel's reaction to his visions, thereby narrowing his options. Daniel's visions piled up, a chaotic storm of futures. Agents at every turn, roadblocks, snipers, traps. In a rain-soaked forest in New Mexico, his mind buckled under the sheer volume. He saw a sniper's shot, a net trap, a dart, all within 30 seconds, but he couldn't react fast enough. Tranquilizer darts filled the air, one catching Daniel in the neck, another sticking in Lila's thigh. They collapsed on the wet forest floor. He awoke in a new facility. Lila was held in a separate cell, her life the chain that bound him. His handlers, now led by a man named Colonel Gaines, threatened him with her safety. Their control was absolute. They forced him to resume working for them, and rage built inside Daniel. It was a molten core, fueled by betrayal and helplessness, and the blood on his hands. Lives had been saved, but many more had been ended, all because of his gift. Every day, Daniel asked to see Lila, even though he saw the answer to the question before it was asked. Weeks passed, the rage building within Daniel threatening to boil over. Then, a guard who enjoyed mocking him told him he didn't need to worry about Lila, and that he'd take good care of her. He leered as he said that, dispelling any doubts of what he really meant. Daniel snapped. He felt his consciousness suddenly expand, a dark tide surging beyond his own body. He slipped into the guard's mind, a sensation like diving into a cold, murky sea, and willed the man to unlock the door. The guard obeyed, his eyes terrified. "Kill yourself," Daniel thought, his eyes boring into the guard. With absolutely no hesitation, the guard drew his pistol, pressed it to his own temple, and splattered his brains across a concrete wall. The power was intoxicating, a current of absolute control. Daniel drew a breath, paused, then unleashed his will. Guards turned on each other. Pistols barked, knives flashed, blood pooled on the concrete, and bodies slumped in corridors. He strolled through the carnage, his mind a storm of rage and purpose, the implant in his skull humming as if alive. He found Lila's cell. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. He freed her, expecting her to run to him, but she snatched a knife from a dead guard and charged him. Her face was twisted with a mindless fury as he grappled with her, his heart shattering as he realized the truth. His command hadn't been precise. The neural controller, amplifying his will, had broadcast his order to kill beyond the guards, beyond the facility, to every mind it could reach. Lila's attack wasn't her choice. It was his. A rampaging guard shot Lila. Daniel screamed and released his full fury on the man who, without a moment's hesitation, stuck his pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Daniel dropped to the floor and held Lila in his arms. When she exhaled her last breath, he gently lifted her into his arms and began making his way toward an exit. But something drew his attention. He paused at a room with a wall lined with TVs tuned to different news networks. The screens were filled with chaos. Feeds from every corner of the globe showed a world unraveling. In London, commuters tore into each other on the tube. In Mumbai, markets became slaughterhouses, vendors and shoppers alike wielding knives and pipes. In New York, massive crowds swirled in a frenzied rage. In rural towns, families turned on each other, their homes burning under starlit skies. The command, his command, had gone global. It was a psychic contagion amplified by the implant. Daniel screamed, his voice raw, willing the world to stop, to reverse the horror. But his thoughts were a shout into the void, swallowed by the chaos he had already unleashed. The human race fell, one by one, until silence blanketed the earth. Daniel stood in the facility, the last man alive. The news feeds died, leaving blank screens which were the final requiem of a world undone. The facility was a tomb, its corridors lined with bodies, its air thick with a coppery tang of blood. He stumbled into the desert, the cold sand shifting beneath his feet, the stars above indifferent to the annihilation below. The weight of billions of deaths crushed him, a burden no mind could bear. The earth was a graveyard, its cities silent, their skyscrapers hollow shells, their streets choked with corpses. His vision showed only darkness now. The future was empty of life. Daniel Harper, the last man, was alone, his story the final warning written in the ashes of humanity. Daniel blinked, clearing the unbelievably horrific vision from his mind. He looked at Lila, struggling frantically against his grip. He saw the guard that would kill her coming toward them and understood what he had to do. He released Lila, holding his arms out and standing tall as she plunged the knife blade into his heart. Daniel Harper, a man granted a glimpse into the future, a mere 30 seconds to rewrite fate. A gift, you might think, to defy destiny. But in the twilight of his choices, he found that foresight is a double-edged sword, cutting deeper than any blade. His final act, a sacrifice to halt a world's unraveling, proves a timeless truth. The power to see tomorrow comes at a cost, sometimes the very soul of humanity itself. That's it for this episode. New episodes of When Reality Frays are released every Monday and Thursday. If you're enjoying the journey into the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained, be sure to press that follow or subscribe button and turn on all reminders so you're alerted whenever an episode drops. Until next time, thank you for listening to When Reality Frays.